recording this. Once again, I will publish this after class. Let's hope the internet gods are on my side and they are going to help me with fast upload times. Last week I had some really good fortune, and I think my interwebs were working really well, but since then it has not been so smooth. So we'll see how it goes. Anyways, so we're going to go ahead and start today. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of clean up some of my drawing. I had some rub off, I guess, from my old drawing that were on the opposite side. So I just have some kind of like overall general pink spots. So I'm just going to kind of clean those spaces up a little bit for me. If you have any of that, feel free to erase those spots. If not, then don't worry about it. So for the most part today, we are going to pretty much finish this drawing. Last time we got to a really good end spot. We had some really nice corrections. I can't quite remember exactly where we left off, but we had some really lovely corrections that we made, and we got some general things placed in the general whereabouts or where they should be. So today we're going to go ahead and start maybe looking once again at our negative space. That's the way that I'm going to start it. I'm going to go ahead and outline too this space a little bit more, just because I know that was something that we had to end up editing a couple of times last class. So I'm just going to do that in a little bit darker lead so it's nice and clear. And that's where we'll begin today. Just starting off with a nice outline, making my border a little bit clearer for everyone. Hold on one second. So I have a brush too. This is a canvas or gesso brush for canvas. It's pretty old. I've used it quite a bit also for ink washes. Notice all of the staining. But I also use it for erasers or cleaning up my eraser bits. So this is also a good way, especially if you're working on really delicate detail-based drawings in the future. Instead of wiping it with your hand, or if you are working with charcoal and you don't want to blow on it to activate those particles in the air, you can also use a brush to, wipe your canvas away or wipe your eraser bits away. That's good. That's a good kind of general tip for like removing shavings and things like that from the page. Now, if you're working obviously with charcoal, you might not want to use a brush like this because it'll smear. But if you are working with graphite or something, or Conte, it'll work just fine. All right. Okay, so I just outlined my border a little bit more, so hopefully that's nice and clear and in the frame for everybody. So what I'm going to start with now, I think I'm just going to look at my general negative shapes once again, and that's going to help me kind of start assessing where I need to start working today. I'm also going to start looking at editing some blocks, or rather adding in some more blocks that I took out last class. Last class I had to take out this blue block. I think I'm going to put this back in today, and as well as then maybe start working on this yellow block that sits in between my blue triangle and my green square or cube on top. So I think that's where I'm going to start. So once again, like I said, I'm just going to start assessing the negative space and kind of go from there. For me, I think I'm actually going to start maybe on this space. The reason I'm wanting to do that is because I'm just trying to assess this negative space, and it's a little hard for me to see how wide I should make this triangle right now because I don't have that blue piece. This one might be a little bit easier to do, but I think it could possibly change or move the space a little bit if I don't add this piece first. So I think this one's a little bit more critical for my editing sake. So I'm going to go ahead and start here. Once again, I just sharpened all my pencils, so I am ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and start drawing with my lovely sepia color, or burnt sienna tone. That's technically what this one would be called, is a burnt sienna. It's a nice kind of red color, like terracotta. And I'm going to go ahead and start looking at this drawing. So I did make some big edits last class, and I'm going to go ahead and start thinking about where those edits happened. I know we moved this block quite a bit. That got changed just due to general positioning, general editing that happened around it. So this form changed quite a bit. We also had to edit our main bridge block here. Now that I'm looking at this and I'm looking at how far this extends into space, I think this is a little bit inaccurate, so I might have to move some pieces, or maybe move the angle of this block to get this blue rectangle in, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Mondrian grid line. I'm going to extend this line up through the form. And the form that I'm extending it to is, of course, just that blue cylinder above. All right, so I'm just going to draw a simple line all the way through that form. And then now I'm going to take my ruler or my pencil, and I'm going to see where that line hits. And on this, what I'm doing is since I've got a really thick pencil here, what I'm doing is I'm actually going to take my pencil and I'm going to move it back and forth on this line. Obviously, I'm doing this on my still life, not just on the drawing. But I'm going to see where this hits so I can get a better rationale for where this is actually dividing through that form. Okay, generally, I think this is pretty correct. So I'm going to go ahead now and just measure it. Okay, so I'm going to do some optical measuring too, some sight measuring. I'm going to measure essentially from the very tip of this yellow rectangle all the way to the edge of my frame or my pictorial border here. And then I'm going to see how many times that can actually fit within this space. Most likely it's going to be larger, but I want to get a general estimate. What I could also do too is maybe see how many times it fits going from here to the border. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that on my still life now. Once again, sight measuring, you want to make sure your elbow is nice and straight and parallel to the ground. Putting my pencil lead to the very tip of that yellow rectangle block. Marking it with my thumb now, making sure I'm not too shaky. I am a little bit today. Too much coffee maybe. Okay, that looks generally right. Okay. So I've got a measurement, and it went just over on my green block, probably about 1/4 of an inch. So this actually looks correct. So if I double check this measurement again, let me double check it. It was a little off. Okay. All right, so that looks pretty correct though. I'm gonna double check it again since that's a little funky of a measurement, or a little wonky. Oh, it is correct. Okay. All right. So this is correct. Okay. So that means this form is right. Once again, this is a little bit of a wonkier measurement. I just had to measure and see how many times this kind of went into this block, and went over a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, probably 1/3 of an inch into my green cube. So this is actually a correct measurement. So that's telling me that the general shape of this is right. So that means I might have to change the angle of this form again. We're going to double check that and see. I'm not sure if we checked this. I know we played around with this form quite a bit last class. This one might just be one of those forms that's just kind of awkward to get. And that's okay. Sometimes that happens. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just taking this line, and I'm going to use a Mondrian grid line essentially. So I'm putting my pencil optically on this space, and I'm just seeing where it cuts through those green blocks. And I think that's the problem. All right. So this should be hitting about here on my green block. So maybe this isn't tall enough. Maybe that's the problem. If that's the case, then I might have to move this up a teensy bit. Not by a lot, but maybe 1/16 of an inch. And I'm going to double check this angle to make sure that this is in the correct orientation, okay? So once again, I'm going to do that Mondrian grid line. And it's cutting through about here. Sorry if my head's in the frame. I'm going to see if that looks right. No, I had it right before. Okay. All right. So I am going to have to move it, I think, up a little bit just so it can meet this block. I think I got the angle correct, though. So I'm going to go ahead and just move this up a little bit more. And I'm glad I double checked this, because then that'll make sense for my other blocks that are going in. Specifically, this is what I was worried about with this yellow one. And so I am also bringing this up just a hair now on the bottom. The reason I'm bringing it up a little bit, about 1/16 of an inch here, primarily is because I'm looking at where it's hitting on my blue triangle piece below it, and it's a little bit off. I have it too far down, so that actually is going to make sense too for my correcting process. And let's double check that blue line, and it goes a little bit further back in space. That's going to make a lot more sense. So I just got this quick measurement just from this form back here. It's going a little bit more into my blue column or cylinder piece. Can't draw a straight line today to save my life, so we're going to go ahead and bring out the ruler. There we go. I'm going to double check this. This might be a little off, or I might need to negotiate this. I just drew this in really quickly. What I'm doing now is I'm just taking my pencil once again, and I'm just seeing how far it goes into my cylinder piece, that blue cylinder piece that sits on top. Okay, that's about 50, so maybe I did draw it a little bit too severe. Okay, once again, I'm just going to clean up this line, and I'm going to do some subtractive drawing here. Just work my eraser a little bit back and forth, going towards the left side of my image. So as we've been working with Conte, I know Beth really enjoys it, but sometimes Conte can be a little bit persnickety when you draw with it. And it can leave a lot of lines behind, which is a good thing for this particular drawing assignment, because I want you to be able to see those corrections and see how much correcting a drawing needs. Not only from my point of view, but for also your point of view. To let you know that this is a normal process. And to also give you a whereabout. It's kind of a kind of guidance, I guess you could say, for when you start to do these own drawings on your own, that there is going to be a sufficient amount of editing, and if you're not editing, then you're doing something wrong. Okay? All right. So I've raised this up now. I think my archway is going to have to be raised too. As you can see, I also had to tilt this line. So essentially what I did here to find this new angle, as you can see, it was going too far up. I actually just stole the angle of my green cube up here. So I looked at what was going on up here and down here, and then I looked at that angle where it was hitting through my blue cylinder piece. That's correct. I already know that's correct. But I was looking at this angle here, and this was a little bit off. So I looked and just kind of compared and contrast those angles. And then I did a hands on the clock and figured out it was the exact same angle. So then I just copied it, all right? I just took my ruler and said, okay, I'm gonna pull this down and just mimic that exact line, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead now and just clean this up a little bit, erase some of those little bits of information. All that wonderful editing that I just did. Now when we're working on our final pieces that you're going to be turning in for this assignment, and hopefully you've already got one finished, and this week you're going to start on your other one, or you're still correcting some and you're going to be well on your way to starting that second one. You're going to want to be really observant of those edited areas, and once you finally fix the drawing, go back over it with a darker Conte pencil, so that way you can kind of help see those spaces develop in the final stages a little bit more clear, or more clearly, I guess. I also think too, having some depth and dimension to some line, extra value or emphasis to the value, and especially when you have all these ghost marks left behind, can be really beautiful and subtle with a drawing. You could even thinking about adding this to your own personal drawings that you do at home or for fun, or your own kind of style, having some dueling lines of different, not only scale widths and pressures, but also different values can add really a lot to a piece. So play around with that on your own work too. Do some really interesting things, conceptually, formally. All right, I'm going back in and just adding some darker line here because it's got a little bit smudged. So I'm just highlighting those things, those forms again. All right, so this is looking so much better now. I feel much more confident putting in this blue block, and I'm glad we started there because there was still a lot of little work that need to be done. So you could see those were just small tweaks, but they had really large impacts on the overall drawing. They helped me find more definitive terms for a lot of these measurements below and also above. Particularly this block piece in general gave me a hard time, and that's okay. This is a more difficult form to draw because there's a lot of moving components to it. Not only is it operating in perspective, but it also has some interesting negative space and an archway that I have to deal with. So there's some really interesting kind of forms happening here. Is that straight? That looks straight. Okay. But, you know, it is a little bit more of a complicated piece. So sometimes those pieces just take a little bit more time. But the big thing is you want to make sure it's accurate. So sometimes you have to just spend a little bit more extra time developing it to make that form correct. And like I said, drawing is a really organic process. It's you fix a little something here, then a tweak needs to be negotiated over there. You know, then once you do that, then over here starts to change. So it's going to be a thing that you have to hit all four corners constantly, right? If you change something over here, something over here is going to have to change, or over here, or then over here, right? And I think in some ways that really is referential to life, right? There's always this like kind of balancing act that has to happen. When one part of our life changes, the other part has to change with it. So some Zen lessons for the day, right? One of the many reasons arts are so important. They teach us how to cope with life. They give us life lessons. They teach us how to be human. How to cope with being human, right? Okay, all right. So we've got this a lot more resolved. So I'm really happy about this now. I'm going to go ahead and start looking at my negative space now in between. And of course, on the recording, this probably won't show up. But my mouse right now, if you can see this on the screen, this should be showing a little tiny gap in between my blue triangle form that's sitting close to us and that blue rectangle space that's going back in space under that yellow archway piece. It's a little tiny negative space there. So I want to be really kind of careful that I am showing that. So I'm going to just draw a little space there. Looks kind of parallel in some ways. And there's also a negative space in between that blue rectangle form sitting under my yellow archway piece from the yellow rectangle form. So I'm also going to be really conscious of how I'm showing that. Okay, that's way too long right there. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just draw a line now. I'm going to do some subtractive drawing with my eraser just so I can carve away that line a little bit more. All right. And I'm actually going to bulk up this line a little bit more on the top just so I can meet that negative space. So I think I drew it a little bit too fat to begin with. Once again, I'm just going to carve away that form a little bit, carve away that line, creating a little bit more clear, distinct space and line. For these forms to exist. All right, so I'm looking at that. I'm looking at where this is hitting. This is pretty accurate now. I'm feeling pretty comfortable about this space. Some of the negative space that's happening here. Yeah, I'm liking the way this is looking now. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to look at maybe the line or the angle of this. And I don't think it's quite right. So I'm going to actually tilt this up a teensy bit because I'm just noticing that this line tilts a little bit here on this negative space. It's really subtle, but it's tilting up slightly. So I'm going to go ahead and just also correct and edit that. And now when this is going to hit here, this is going to make a little bit more sense in terms of where it's hitting on my yellow form below it. There we go. I think that looks much better now. The reason like I said, I was changing that just a degree or fraction of a degree was because it was hitting a little bit maybe too low here and it just needed to move up a teensy bit. Also, that's going to correct where it's starting to hit on my yellow piece down here. So just those small little tweaks really help push a drawing into the right space. And at this point, we're into more fine-tuned edits where it might move just a fraction of an inch, right? A 1/16 of an inch, even an 1/18 of an inch will make a big difference in your drawing. Okay, so this is looking pretty good now. I'm feeling comfortable about this relationship. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start actually editing this form a little bit. This is a teensy bit at an angle as well. Right now in my drawing it's pretty straight, but if we look at our form, it's a little bit tilted because this space is also a little bit tilted, okay? It's not completely running parallel to our bottom pictorial line here. So what I'm going to do then is translate that information a little bit lower and just take that same line and mimic that line that I just edited on top to the bottom, okay? Remember, once again, it is a point that is going back into space. So it's going to come to some vanishing point that's sitting back here in the distance. So those lines are always going to be somewhat parallel, but they're also going to be converging at some point. So there's going to be always a little tilt to them whenever they're drastically dropped or whenever they're dropped lower, okay? Okay, let's see. Also, I'm noticing too, if we look at the width of this blue triangle that's closest to us in the foreground, if we look at that bottom base where it's hitting the table, and we look at the length here, and then if we look up and if we look at the length here, there's a small difference. Primarily, this is a little bit wider than this shape up here. So we're also going to have to make this a little bit more narrow up top and then kind of bow it a teensy, or not bow it, but widen it at the base. And I think this is going to help give us some of that really drastic little negative shape space that I'm seeing in between that blue rectangle form and my blue triangle, okay? All right, so once that's done, I'm feeling pretty good there. I'm looking at my green block now and cube, and I'm just gonna go ahead and make this a little bit more mapped in and clear. I'm gonna have to use my drawing a little bit on screen because it's a little bit distorted from my perspective. So I'm just gonna make sure that I'm seeing these angles right. I'm trying to work directly over it, but it's a little bit hard for me to see it too. So again, this is gonna be my encouragement. If you haven't tried drawing standing up, I highly recommend it. It's very, very good. It'll help you really see spaces a little bit more accurately. And it'll also help with distortion, especially when you work. I think this is, what is this? This is usually when just this size paper usually gives me distortions. This is 14 inches by 17, so anything I think past 12 or really around 12 for me, I get distortion in my view. So I'm going to highly recommend trying to stand up and draw. You have a clean wall space that you can use, or a panel or a door. Just draw on the door. Hang your work up and just start drawing. I'm going to highly recommend it. All right, so I've got my cube a little bit more mopped in now. It's looking pretty decent. Form-wise. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and also start looking at my yellow form down here, this cube space. This looks pretty straight. It just goes in a little bit into my green cube, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Once again, I'm just drawing a straight line down. Because that yellow cube looks... that's a good edit then. Okay, so we know this needs to change then a little bit too. My blue triangle needs to be cut in a little bit. Or, okay, this is a good edit actually. So this is a good learning decision. Okay, so I just put in my yellow block line on the right hand side, or on the left hand side, excuse me. And I just dropped that line down, and then I looked where it hit on my blue triangle space, and it's way over. I just extended my blue triangle to see if that would fit, but then that would mean I'd have to move not only my red block, but it also would change the proportion of this block. Thus, changing the width of this block is going to make me expand all of this space. Now, I just figured out this space pretty much almost 100%, right? There's probably still some small tweaks that I can do in here, but I got this space pretty mapped in pretty well, right? Like, we've figured out the negative spaces, we've looked at this, we've looked at the archway, we've looked at how our blocks are sitting, the angle, the forms of them. This is already correct. So if I've got a large portion of my drawing correct, that means this block is wrong, or this block is wrong. So if this block, which has been already kind of figured out because of all of these other lines and all of these negative spaces, are dictating that this form is mostly correct, then that means I have to change something above. So if I bring this block back up, I'm going to have to also extend, all of this space. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look at this space now, because that's my next go-to step. Okay, this block, my green block, is going to be mostly wrong. And if I look at my negative space here, I see a big discrepancy, right? So I want you to look, if you extend this line up, your yellow bridge piece line on the left-hand side, if you just extend that up, and I'm going to go ahead and just do it so everybody can see it. That looks mostly straight. I'm going to go ahead and divide that cube in half, right? This will mostly divide my cube on the right-hand side, the green cube that is, in half. So that means this block actually needs to be moved over here. So this corner piece actually sits technically right here. So that means this whole entire block is going to shift in scale, making this smaller and then equaling and being able to fit in my blue block here, okay? So these are going to be, once again, those big critical editing moments that you come to, and you have to make a decision on whether that space is correct. If it looks a little wonky, why does it look wonky? And once again, those are those critical problem-solving skills that you're going to have to start developing to kind of see and figure out what areas are going to be, messed up, or what areas are going to need to be fixed. And sometimes it's going to be easier to see those things, and sometimes you're going to get stuck. If you get really stuck and you just don't know how to handle it, the best thing to do is just literally stick your drawing up vertical from you, walk away, get some distance from it, look at it, analyze it. And then if that doesn't work, after you have looked, literally physically gotten away from your drawing, let's say 12 feet, and really looked and examined your work and looked at your reference image and examined it and gone back and forth, and if that hasn't worked, then just go ahead and take a 5-minute break and then come back to it with fresh eyes. Because sometimes, let's face it, our eyes get a little exhausted, and especially if we've been studying it so closely for so long, our brains can get a little exhausted, our eyes can get a little exhausted, and we can miss things. All right, so this is a really good edit. I'm happy we found this mistake, and now we're going to go ahead and start editing it. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and extend a Mondrian grid line essentially through my blue triangle piece, and I'm gonna see if this corner is correct. Okay, so I'm gonna take my ruler up and just literally optically line it up on that line and see if that is correct. You know what? I've actually got a thin little paintbrush here. I'm gonna do this instead. I think this might need to go over just a hair more, so I'm going to just draw it. I'm going to put my ruler directly on that line, and since my pencil now is dull, it's just going to move over a teensy bit. So hopefully you can see that little tiny fraction of the difference. And I'm going to go ahead and start erasing this. And I'm going to go ahead and start remolding or remodeling this cube space. So I'm going to look at where this hits optically, this line, and where it dissects. I'm going to just draw it where I think it is, and then I'm going to see if that's correct. And there's some pretty extreme. There we go. Hopefully you can see that new line. I know there's a lot of lines working on my page, but hopefully you can see that just fine. Okay, it's working here. Because if I extend that line all the way through, I just get the barest of crusts of my negative space showing through or popping through this archway. So if I extend that line all the way through it, like I said, I just get a little tiny archway negative space in here. So that's going to be really helpful for me just to kind of identify if this is the correct angle. Let's model that a little bit more so we can see that space some. Okay, I have to edit this negative space just a teensy bit. All right, and then let's see. Let's double check this again just to make sure this looks correct. Okay, and I'm going to check that too with my paintbrush, aka dowel rod. Just a teensy bit, so that's correct. Okay, all right. And then my top of my box, I should have about 1/4 of an inch to 1/3 of an inch on top, coming through and exiting my page. So I should be able to see my horizon line within that space, just from the angle. And it's hitting directly on this horizon line, so that's going to give me a great proportion for the angle that I have to draw. And that's perfect. Okay, good. So I fixed this. This cube should be correct now. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to fix the angle now because I think this is quite off. So I'm going to go see, just in general, I'm going to take my dowel rod once again, aka paintbrush, and I'm going to place it on the top of my green box. And I'm going to find this angle here. And I'm going to see where that exits the page and then where it's also cutting through. So this is really off, I think. And yeah, this is, I think, generally pretty off. Okay. So it's actually hitting. That's a pretty big difference. So this is actually hitting right on, I'm going to have to get a different pencil, sorry. It's getting really low. This is generally hitting this line right here, so we can see the big difference, how off that is. It's generally hitting right at our blue, or our green, excuse me, half circle piece that's sitting over on the right-hand side. Now, our right-hand side is mostly going to be, we're going to have to edit this some. So I'm going to double check this and make sure that this angle's correct, because I already know that this block and this block are most likely going to have to change. So I'm going to try to see where this hits, because this is going to be the angle that I really need to look for, okay? So I'm going to assess essentially the difference or distance between the top portion of my pictorial frame and where it's exiting in relation, okay? So it's not as severe. Okay, it's coming to about here. Still, it's a little off. So, from what I initially had. And that's okay. That's why we measure. I'm going to double check this again because I think this, I'm not going to totally stick with this angle yet because I think there's a lot of other things that can change here. So I'm just going to generally draw in what I think it is, like I said. And then I'm going to come back and double check it with other angles and measurements around it, okay? So this is a good little tip too. When you start having to play with angles that are a little bit precarious in the fact that maybe you only have one source and that source is maybe a weak source to measure, wait and just gesture something in really quick, and then you can kind of figure that out when other areas of the drawing have been updated and fixed, all right? And to update other areas of the drawing, we can use other things that are corrected below it to help fix those forms. And then once those forms are fixed, then we can fix this form again, all right? So once again, it's that drawing back and forth, right? We have to touch kind of all four corners. And as soon as you fix one area of a drawing, another area becomes noticeably incorrect, all right? So that's going to be that, and we're just going to gesture something in really quickly. It's most likely going to probably look very similar on your end because of camera, the camera's inability to really catch some of these more refined marks. Okay. All right, so slight tweaks there, but those are really good tweaks. Okay, so let's go back to maybe this angle here. So I'm going to go ahead and extend my blue triangle piece, and I'm going to extend this back space all the way up with the Mondrian grid line. And I'm going to see where that hits. Okay. So it's saying that this space, if I bring this all the way up, I'm going to go ahead and check now. This looks really incorrect to me. So I'm going to go ahead and double check this size. And I'm going to compare this side of the box and maybe just see where it measures into this side of the box, okay, below it. So AKA, I'm going to look at my left plane of my green box, and then I'm going to take that measurement and see how many times it can fit into my top of my blue triangle piece, okay? Then from there, I'm also going to look at my Mondrian grid line. I think that this should be maybe like hitting here, but that still doesn't look wide enough to me. So I might have to allocate more space on the right side or maybe even play with this, widening this form just a teensy bit, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. So I'm measuring my cube on the left side, that first left side plane. And then I'm going to drop it down into my blue triangle piece. And it should, that measurement does look correct. So this is a little fishy to me. So we're going to go ahead and double check this again. Once again, I'm just measuring this space and seeing how many times it can fit into this space. Okay, I've got my green measurement plane again. Okay, so I've got probably about 1/4 of an inch difference there. Oh, dang, that is like accurate. That looks really wonky to me. All right. Okay, I'm gonna trust my eyes here. So we're gonna go ahead and erase this. And we're gonna go ahead now and look at our Mondrian grid line, okay? So that line that I pulled up from our blue triangle space. In just a second. I'm gonna have to go ahead and erase my, or sharpen my drawing utensils here in a second because I'm getting nubs now at this point that I'm drawing with. All right, so I'm gonna look at this line right here. So the blue back left edge of my triangle, and I'm gonna see where that actually hits and where my green cube on the left hand side is falling down in comparison. It's a little bit of an overhang, maybe like 1/8 of an inch. Yeah, probably about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this down. So I'm going to go ahead and extend this a teensy bit. And we'll see if that looks correct. Once again, I'm going to just draw. I'm going to draw and extend. So that looks about correct. So this should be my new corrected box form. This looks pretty accurate now. I was worried there for a second, but it looks pretty accurate now. So hopefully you should have something that looks similar at this point. Do I need to slow down, or am I going too fast, or do I need to re-explain something?
I think you have good pace.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna go sharpen my pencil real fast, so I'll be back in a second. Sorry for the screeching noises. Okay. Thank you, Beth, for commenting too. That makes me feel better. Okay, you all can hear me. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to assess where my yellow cube is sticking out in comparison to my green block and also my blue form below it. All right, so it's almost hitting right at the corner edge of my blue triangle form. And I've got a decent little lip here, but also too, this is a precarious little angle because my corner is actually shifting my perspective a little bit. So I can actually see a teensy bit, a little fraction of a teensy bit, maybe even here, that corner. So that's actually shifting the viewpoint a little bit. So it's not totally a straight line. So I think that's going to be a little funky for us to look at. And you can double check that too, just with a nice Modern grid line. It's just like slightly tilted. So, and I think it's primarily just that corner. And then I'm going to look at where it hits and goes into my yellow bridge piece. I'm going to use, once again, a Modern grid line technique. I'm going to extend this space or that line just through where I think it sits. And once again, that's just that very front corner edge of my yellow brick piece. Or block piece, excuse me. And so I'm going to double check this now. Modern grid line, bringing my pencil up and extending that through the space. So it should just have a corner that is covered with my bridge piece, if that's the correct angle. All right, so that's what it looks like right now. And that looks pretty correct to me. So I think I'm pretty happy with this angle. I feel like this is the right one. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is the line. Okay. And there we go. So this is looking pretty correct now. I'm going to go ahead and start working on my green triangle form. I'm going to go ahead and assess the distance between the edge of my green triangle, the back side of it, and where that edge is in distance to the left furthest edge of my green cube. So once again, I'm quickly assessing just optically, kind of going back and forth and looking at that form. And so I'm just going to get a rough estimation and redraw that line. And I think it's a little bit closer, just on where I'm thinking it's hitting. And I think that might be correct. All right, so you can see I just did 2 lines there. It's very thin, but it just looks like a heavy line maybe from your perspective of the camera. Let me see if I can zoom in a teensy bit. This might be scary. Did that help at all? Okay, I guess not. I guess I can't zoom in while I'm filming. That's fun. That's a fun little edit. All right, I'm gonna bring this up to the screen then. So it's a really tiny little line. Hopefully you can see that little distance. It's like a hair's distance apart. And I'm just going to erase that back a little bit. And so if I'm looking at the distance now where it's hitting, and there's a little bit of a negative space showing, that's going to give me a key off about where I need to place my line here. And it just hits right at that very edge of the triangle, that blue triangle. And I'm just really quickly looking, drawing and editing that space. So I've got a little triangle now. I have negative space down here. This is looking really correct for me. So I'm thinking this is pretty accurate at this point. I'm not totally convinced on how I'm gonna these angles yet. I'm gonna gesture them in. I'm gonna go back and look at them again because I don't think that they're totally correct when I place them. Like I said, I'm gonna really study this angle and think about that placement. And I want you to watch how quickly I am looking, and then I'm going back to my drawing and fixing it. I'm working over the same line in a zigzag fashion. And I'm really, really studying that line. And I'm getting a general approximation. Like I said, I'm just not totally convinced on that line yet. So I'm gonna look at these later. Okay, I'll be able to fix them once I'm able to fix this space. But I can't fix this space until these forms are in a general location that I believe is correct. So then I can fix my red cube, and then I'll be able to fix my green half circle. Then I'll be able to fix those angles. Okay. So I know that sounds like a lot of work, but it'll be pretty quick here. Relatively quick. Okay. Hopefully we'll go down. I'm going to go ahead and kind of work this way a little bit. This looks right. This angle looks right to me too. So I'm going to go ahead and extend this all the way through the plane. This might be too fat now. Maybe I need to put it on a salad diet and shrink it down some. But I'm going to look at my negative space here, and this is looking pretty correct. So I think maybe this is right. I'm just going to look for a few seconds. Yeah, that looks pretty correct. It looks wide when I drew it, so I'm kind of questioning it a teensy bit. Maybe it's just a subtle change. Maybe it's like a 1/16 of an inch difference. That might be it. Just looks slightly off. I know these things seem a little nitpicky right now, but this is where I want you to get eventually. I want you to get to that stage where you can see maybe a 1/16 of an inch difference. I know some of you might be rolling your eyes and thinking that won't happen. It will. Just give it time. Or you might be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't see any difference there. And you will grow to see the difference. I promise. Okay. I think that's looking better now. I think what's throwing me off is maybe the angle of this box a little bit. All right. So let's go ahead and start chipping away at this box. So in general, I think that maybe we can start adjusting how wide this space is. Here, it is going to have, you're going to be able to see more of the surface of the top of the box. Not as much here, right? Because that's further away from us. But I don't think we're going to be able to quite see as much. So I'm going to go ahead and first assess where this sits in relation to our green triangle block behind it, and then our blue triangle block to the right of it. Okay, so it's hitting in a pretty general correct position on our blue triangle block. What I think is the big issue is I think it goes too far into our green triangle. Okay, so I think it's maybe only going to go about here. The reason I'm able to see that is just looking at the height difference and the distance between my negative space, once again, and that new little background space of my green triangle piece. All right, so I really studied that space pretty carefully, and I just assessed it, and I think that this is a better distance. So I'm going to go in and erase now that background line. So you're going to see a big shift in our box. And then I'm going to look at where it ends on our edge. And this block in particular, you're able to actually see that our square pieces or our cube pieces actually have a big flat kind of cut, softening the edge a little bit. So it's not fully sharp or totally pointed. It's a little bit buffed there. There's a little bit of a kind of beveled edge. So I'm going to go ahead now and fix this form a teensy bit, giving it that beveled edge on the corners. And hopefully this registers on our camera. Fine for us. Alright. And I'm going to go ahead and do my Modron grid lines once again. And I'm just going to use the line and extend it through the space just to see where that angle hits on other objects. So I'm looking at my bridge piece once again. That's a pretty critical piece for me. And my top of my blue triangle piece. And I'm going to see if that line actually is, if I'm getting enough space there. Okay, so this does need to be tilted a little bit, I think. Let's double check. I'm going to get my... Maybe I got it. Maybe I do have it. Hold on, let me double check. Okay. No, it might look right. Okay. This might actually be the right angle. Okay. Maybe it just needs to go down a teensy bit. Okay, all right, that's correct, I think. So it's hitting just above my kind of corner here of my edge of my bridge piece, and it's looking pretty correct in terms of just like the form and how it's functioning. My bridge piece is also pretty beveled on the side here, so I'm going to go ahead and just add that little curve. That's throwing me off a teensy bit, so I'm going to go ahead and just add it. So at this point of the drawing, when we're getting to this kind of editing stage, so we're probably about, what, like 2 hours, 3 hours into the drawing, you can start adding some more characteristic components. Like a lot of these pieces, after they've been fully kind of edited and went through the gambit of the editing trial and process, will have little kind of features or characteristics that make them kind of unique. And what I mean by that is looking at specifically the way that they're beveled, and maybe you start to add in some of those beveled or curved corners. This is the kind of later stages of drawing, right? That's when you add those details in. And like I said, you don't want to ever start with details, like specifically on our bridge piece, there's a couple of areas where the wood's like knocked in a little bit on the right hand side. You've got some kind of little tiny dents on our arch here. Add those in at the very end of the drawing, because if you start adding those in at the beginning, like I said, you're going to have to correct those forms anyways, and if you spend all that time making all those little details, that's just going to be a waste of time, because you're going to have to erase it because the drawing's wrong and you know that. Once again, that's why this kind of drawing process and demo is going to be so important, because it teaches you to learn how to see drawings and know that our first initial attempts at a drawing are usually incorrect, and they need to be worked on and refined. So like I said, those kind of curved areas of the brick that we're working on, or the blocks that we're working on, really think about adding and editing those later in the drawing process. So at this point, it might behoove me to add some of those little characteristic differences, just so I see the actual forms a little bit more clearly. All right. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna go back once again and just double check this space now. And two, I think this is a good kind of example of thinking about sight measuring. Once again, once we keep our arm parallel to the floor and that shoulder and elbow joint locked, you'll be able to also see a cleaner kind of line. The closer you bring it to your eyes, the fuzzier that line's going to be. If you bring that away from you, it'll be a cleaner, crisper line for you to draw from. All right, so this line looks pretty correct. This is what I'm seeing when I'm going back and forth, how much negative space I'm seeing on both sides, and this is looking accurate now. Okay, so if this line's correct, I think I only had to like change it maybe like a fraction of an inch, so that's pretty good. I'm gonna double check this top line now of that red cube in back and see where that's hitting on my actual still life in front of me. Okay. And that is almost perfect, almost. I'm gonna have to just change it a teensy bit. It's hitting almost right where my yellow block is exiting the frame. Almost right there. So I'm just gonna do some subtractive drawing. I'm gonna mark my brush where it is, and I'm just gonna take my eraser and go back and forth over that line, carving it away to the correct angle. All right, so this is looking better. My left-hand side now needs to be adjusted somewhat, all right? We have seen by many examples on this particular image that we've had to cut away some of our frame, and I think I might have to do that again a little bit. I'm gonna have to end up cutting this down, this block on the left side, so just taking away more information essentially on that block. And that looks pretty better, much better now. All right, let's go ahead and extend this line up into space. So that corner that's closest to us, just extend that line up into space. And then we're gonna go ahead and take the angle sitting right next to the blue triangle form and just take that line and extend that up to space, all right? So both of those vertical lines on those corners of the box, just extend them to both the top and bottom portions of the drawing. And we're gonna now see where those hit on the frame, just to get a better assessment on those planes of the box. Once again, I'm gonna be using my very thin paintbrush. Oh, that's a fun little adventure there. So that is pretty angled. Oh, that's funky. Okay, so this is not straight at all, which is like what I was thinking, but I didn't want to put that down. All right. This box is not straight. The angles here, this actually goes up to a 3rd point perspective. So I'm gonna actually have to shift my box lines so that they're angled. So I'm gonna extend these lines now up into space, and these are just slightly going to a 3rd point perspective in the sky. I'm gonna double check them. Okay, this should be going off the page by quite a bit. All right, and we're gonna look at this one, and then we're gonna look at this one. All right. Look at all those beautiful lines. Okay. Oh, there is some really wacky perspective happening in this still life. This is a good one. I got a good one for you guys. Okay, all right. This looks actually correct now. So I think it was just an angle issue in terms of perspective. So I'm pretty happy now with the angle of this. I think it's making a lot more sense perspectively. I think this is accurate now. So I think that was the big issue. This is kind of a rare, well, I wouldn't say rarer issue, but an issue that might not be as common. Maybe I'll word it like that. So if you are noticing that there is some wackiness or there's like something that isn't quite looking right vertically to some of your objects, double check and make sure that your objects aren't going to a third point perspective. And we're going to dive into, I think, perspective next week. I think that might be a little bit too much to take on today. Because we're going to be talking more about cross contour lines, and that's really when I'm going to be once again studying how line works in space and how it operates. So we'll be able to figure that out a little bit more effectively when we start studying perspective 2. And sometimes in still lives, you'll have multiple point perspectives operating at once, just depending upon the angle that you select, how much you're cropping an object, how far away from an object you are, also the position of blocks. If they're kind of tumbled or kind of haphazardly thrown on a table, some of them can be a little bit misleading because it might look like they're working in a different type of perspective, and some of them actually might be, right? Instead of a 2-point perspective, which is what we are typically working in here, we're actually working somewhat in a 3-point perspective because we have a new vanishing point. Thus, this box is actually tilted in a direction going upwards, which makes sense now, especially we can tell that because if we look over on our reference image, and if we look at the very edge of where our red brick, or I keep saying brick, our red cube is on the left-hand side of our drawing or reference image, there's actually a little bit of a triangle negative space there. So that's actually giving us an indicator that that line isn't totally straight. And that is actually operating in a 3-point perspective. So that's going to be a good little fun tip for us to learn. I'm going to go ahead and once again cut my border back. Hopefully this shouldn't be the last. Hopefully this is the last time I'm going to have to do this. And once again, like I said, cutting your border back, normally this won't be a problem unless you're kind of drawing like we're doing. I just kind of found an image and I said, we're going to do this today. And, I'm not going to necessarily measure my ratio that I have on my reference image and match the ratio onto my drawing. I just kind of started eyeballing it and started drawing. We're always going to have to keep that in mind too. I'm going to go ahead and erase this other line now. Are any of you on campus this semester at all? Like in-person classes?
I have the option to, but because of bi-weekly testing, I can't get in during that time. So if I wanted to go on campus, I would have to find somewhere different to get my testing and hand it in.
Got it.
Which
Okay.
really sucks.
Yeah. I get you. I feel you on that. I had to go do that today. That's why I was scared I was going to be a little late because the roads were not super great, especially on Green Bay campus. They're terrible. Oh my gosh, they're terrible. So I had to do my bi-weekly testing because I'm also on campus this semester. So but I'm sorry you can't that's the restriction there. I'm sorry about that. All right. Okay, we're in a good spot. So now I feel I am confident. I am ready to get to my green triangle or circle pieces in the back. I actually don't think this is going to change much, to be perfectly honest. I feel pretty good about this position. I'm going to look at where it maybe enters a little bit more and where it's entering on my red box. I think that's going to be the only thing that really changes here. I think it's going to be a little bit more drastic than what I had it originally. And then that means my angle is going to change on my green triangle. So that piece was wrong, which I was afraid of that. I wasn't sure if that was wrong. It looked right when I did it, but now that I see it, it's looking pretty wrong. All right. Once again, I'm just looking at where it's exiting or where it's hitting on my... and look at that. That space looks much better now. Let's look at our negative space. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, look at this. Look at this. That's beautiful, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. All All right, I'm gonna go ahead and redraw my horizon line because it's getting lost in the chaos. All right, look at that. That form is working well. All right, so if you have not had this type of editing in any of your contour line drawings, I'm gonna highly suggest you go back and do this level of editing on your contour line drawings, okay? This is what I wanna see, this type of attention to detail, this type of measuring, this type of really, really critical observation, okay? I also wanna see all these lines too. That also helps me assess how you're thinking about saying things and all that good stuff. And it's also gonna help you just fix your drawing, make it super accurate. All right. I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm gonna double check these angles and then I think we're almost gonna be done, okay? Dare I say it? Dare I say it? I think that's gonna be the thing. Actually, I think this is the new line. I think I messed up earlier today. Yep, that's the new line. Okay. Yeah, I think we're almost done. So this is exciting. All right, so let's go ahead and start looking at the angle of this space. So first off, I'm gonna once again draw them under on good line. I'm gonna see where the angles are hitting through on my objects here. I'm just gonna extend these lines into space just to see. Okay, so let's go ahead and start that process. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to hit the camera. So it's heading right here. Okay, so this is just a little bit off. So not drastic, but a teensy bit off. So on my drawing, it is hitting the edge of my ellipse on the top. All right, so if I have my ellipse drawn here, it is just hitting right under that line. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just draw it with my ruler because my form was hitting a little bit. So it's just right under the ellipse line. Okay, so that looks right. I'm gonna go double check this one now. Let's see where that's hitting. Yeah, that's pretty close. That one's closer. So again, I'm just gonna have to slightly tweak it up a little bit. I'm going to double check where this is hitting on the outside too. That'll give me a better assessment. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, all right. So this is a little bit more of an angle than I thought it was going up. So I'm going to go ahead now and assess the difference on the angles now on the opposite side. So I'm going to look at where the angles are going to from left to right instead of right to left, okay? Hopefully that made sense. All right, so that back angle of the cube, if that didn't make sense. Okay, and that is just right above the horizon line. So I'm going to double check that again. Okay, so that's pretty close. I'm going to check where that's exiting. That's actually pretty, that's pretty right. Okay, I'm gonna check now this this line and see where this is hitting. It's almost running completely parallel to this line right here. So that's a good little edit for me to adjust and fix. There it is, for sure. Okay. All right, so there are my new edits. And that should go ahead and complete that cube form, making it a teensy bit wider, opening up that space a little bit more, which would make sense because it was too closed off in comparison to this one. So those are small little edits, but they really did have a big impact on the overall form of this cube. All right. So I'm at the point where I can start adding in a darker Conte to start emphasizing those lines a little bit more. I am also going to go ahead and erase some of those edit lines of the drawing. Because like I said, I think we're pretty much at the end of this drawing. Like I said, there's going to be some things where we need to make more specific characteristics of the box to bring them to life, to bring the objecthood, the specificity in, such as curving your edges around the boxes, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm curving that edge a little bit. You can really start to see it here, the big effect that it can play here, right? And I'm going to just use a dark brown. This is the sepia color, so it's technically a red, but it's a really dark brown red. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just, like I said, start adding some of those little characteristics. And as I said, when you start going into making general objects on your drawing, which is always what you should start with, always work from general to specific. I'm going to say that. You're going to get really sick of me saying that probably throughout the semester. But we're always going to work from general forms to the specific forms. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you are working from, let's say if you're drawing a human skull, all right, we aren't going to start with a skull at first. We're going to start with a circle, and then we're going to start with a square, all right? And then from there, we start to edit, right? We start to think about, the size and proportion of the circle in relation to the square. Then we start thinking about, is the square, going to be exactly the same width as the circle? Is it a little bit smaller? Then we're going to start thinking about, is the circle maybe starting to actually bow a little bit more? What's the exact angle of that? Then from there, we're going to start thinking about the edge qualities of that square and of that space. And then we'll be able to start thinking about the height in relationship to the circle. Is that maybe a little bit higher, right? So then we can start actually editing and making our forms more accurate, where our skull actually might sit in relationship to the mouth, the nose, right, the ears, the eye sockets, all that good stuff, right? And then you can actually start to get in a face, right? You can start to learn those forms that way. So that's actually how we start to build those structures, right? Starting with general forms, and then carving out the space and making it more specific. And then, whoops, there you go. You've actually got a human start to a skull and a head, right? So always start with general forms and then move to more specific features later in the editing process, okay? I know that's just a really quick little demo there, but hopefully that illustrated that point pretty accurately. All right, so like I said, I'm just going to start adding in some of those characteristics. I'm really looking at the forms too when I'm doing this. When I'm going straight down a line, maybe I'm not necessarily looking at that one as much because I've already fixed that form and it's pretty correct. But specifically, maybe some of these blocks, like I said, have those beveled edges, so they're not perfectly square. So I'm making sure to figure out where that line actually cuts in, how beveled that edge actually is. And once again, this is a contour drawing, so I'm really looking at just defining the edges, okay? That edge quality there. Here's another specific feature on this particular still life. This red cube has this really great highlighted edge for us to draw. And how it curves back into space. All right, so things like that. And I'm moving on to my triangle now. Once again, I'm just really thinking about the forms themselves. You need to resharpen a pencil, feel free to. During this process, I think I'm going to have to do that probably a couple of times too. I might do that just with my hand sharpener right next to me. I'm also going to probably stop too and erase some of these lines as I'm going through this process. Just to kind of give us a clearer form, you will still be able to see a lot of these ghost marks, but hopefully you should be able to see the form starting to develop on their own. And remember, I do want to see some of these ghost marks too. Like, it's okay if they're stained your paper some. It's perfectly fine. I want to see the editing process when you turn in your final projects for me. Now, obviously, this project is our in-class project. I would like to see this posted on your blog too. So simply take a picture of it. This will be your attendance grade for this week. And last week. When we do in-progress drawings, I'll probably ask you just to post them, just so I can see how you're doing, how you're thinking about space, all that good stuff. Once again, this is an in-progress kind of work. It's not a final portion. So going back to that question earlier, and who was the student who asked that question earlier too? I didn't get a name. Well, if you don't want to speak again, I understand. But go ahead and type your name in chat just so I can start learning your voices and learning your names. But I think that was a good question that they brought up, talking about how should we start to document in progress work versus, more formal work. This is a work that we're doing in class. This could be more of a in progress type of shot. So I'm not going to be super nitpicky if, it's documented on your desk and it's not on a professional background or nice, superb lighting, if it's just kind of average lighting. Like if it's lighting like this, I think this is fine. All right. But I would like to see these posted on your blog. So this is your heads up, warning, reminder. And I'll make sure to give you a reminder too to post this on our week 4 agenda. I think I'm going to let us go probably a little earlier today. Not just yet, but probably a little earlier. I don't think we're going to have enough time to do our lecture on linear perspective. So we'll do that next class. Honestly, in my teaching plan, I had it scheduled for next class, so I was thinking maybe I could get a jump on it early. But I see now my planning self from the past was correct on that assessment of time. All right, so we probably spent about, I don't know, 4 hours on this drawing so far, to complete it. I think that's probably a good assessment for how long you should be spending on yours, maybe a little more, since the size is probably larger. So just be aware of that. This is the kind of quality that I'm looking for. If your work is finished and it's not to this standard or quality, then I would highly recommend going back and editing it further. I'm gonna sharpen my pencil real quick. And I'm gonna have to buy some new Conte pencils. Looks like I'm gonna have to go on Amazon because they're most likely gonna be not offering on Diploc right now. I have some students in my painting class too who are having some order issues, so I am sorry for any delays or issues that you're having. I did try my absolute best to make sure that this semester went off with a hitch, but that is COVID, you know? Just gotta be flexible right now. I think that's the big thing. Alright, I'm feeling pretty good about this drawing so far. I think it's pretty well finished. Just going to rotate my drawing a little bit so it's easier for me to access with my hand. So whenever working with ellipses, I highly recommend doing that too. It's looking pretty good. Okay, I'm liking the way this is functioning. It's specific. Got some character traits in there that are pretty definitive and clear. If there's any slightly bowed kind of features in the wood, I'm going to go ahead and add those now. Specifically some of these, this bridge piece in the back has a little bit of a gnarled feature. So I'm going to go ahead and add some of that little ripple. So it just has like a double seam here, it seems. So I'm going to go ahead and just push that through on my triangle space too. Make that known, make that felt. Widen that corner a little bit. Just gonna erase that edge a teensy bit so I can get more of a rounded edge there. This corner also has a little bit of a upraised bottom, so I'm gonna go ahead and also do some subtractive drawing. Just cut in a little bit with my eraser, both on the top and bottom lines, just to give it a little bit more of that kind of wobble there. It's not too drastic, but it's something small, and I think it's specific about that form. All right, so I'm thinking this is pretty good. Once again, this is contour line drawing, so there's no shadows, there's no lines filling in the cross contours of the plane. It's just the actual contours of the objects themselves. So this is going to be your final project, what you should be turning in, something like this. This has been well edited over a span of 2 class periods, so yeah, hopefully you should have something that looks around this quality, is this accurate, and depicts those objects and forms of your still life accurately and perspectively. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let us go for the day. I do have some quick announcements, so I want you to stay on for another 5 minutes, but I am going to shut down our video recording.